Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. There were 4 of us, crammed inside my old Ford Explorer that August night, heading from Manhattan, Kansas to Chicago. Jake wouldn't stop fiddling with the radio, while Carlos counted the money we'd scraped together for gas. Tommy had stretched out in the back seat, already half asleep, despite promising he'd stay awake the whole trip. We had graduated from college just 3 months earlier, and I was moving to start my new job at a software company downtown. The guys insisted on coming with me on the 12-hour drive. They said it was a kind of tradition, one last adventure before each of us went our separate ways. The trunk and nearly the entire back of the car were packed with my boxes. There were so many I could barely see through the rearview mirror. We'd been on the road about 6 hours when Carlos started complaining that he needed to stretch his legs. The GPS showed a rest area about 15 miles ahead, in the middle of nowhere, off Highway 36. Jake was driving then, squinting into the darkness that covered the empty road. It had been over an hour since we'd passed another car. The radio kept cutting out with static, and Tommy had given up trying to find a decent station. That was when we saw the faded blue sign announcing Riverside Rest Area, barely visible in the headlights. Jake turned in without anyone saying anything. We all needed a break, to move around a little. Maybe buy something from the vending machines, if they still worked. The place was exactly what you'd expect to find in the rural heart of the United States. A couple of brick buildings with flickering fluorescent lights, a few scattered picnic tables, and a parking lot that had seen better days. There was only one other vehicle there, an old white van parked far away, near the tree line. Jake parked near the main building and we got out, stretching and complaining. The night air felt different out there, thick, humid, filled with the chirping of crickets and that earthy smell that only exists far from the city. Carlos headed straight for the bathroom, while Jake started doing jumping jacks in front of the car. Tommy pulled out his pack of Marlboros and pointed toward the woods behind the buildings. "I'm going to smoke," he said, and walked off before any of us could respond. I remember checking my phone, 3:47 a.m. No signal. The vending machines were relics from another time. Half the buttons didn't even light up, but I managed to get a Coca-Cola. Jake leaned against the Explorer, staring at his phone screen with no service, maybe hoping a miraculous signal bar would appear. That was when I realized something. The white van's engine was running. Had it been running since we arrived? I couldn't remember. The windows, covered in a dark tint, gave no view of the inside. Something about that image made my skin prickle, but I tried to ignore it. It was probably just exhaustion and too many horror movies. Carlos came out of the bathroom laughing, joking about the graffiti on the walls. And we all laughed too, our voices too loud for the quiet of the place. Tommy had been gone barely 5 minutes when we heard a dull thud, like someone had dropped a sack of cement. Then absolute silence. Jake cut off the mid-sentence, and we all turned toward the woods. The crickets had stopped. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Tommy," Jake called, his voice a little shaky. No answer. Carlos took a few steps toward the trees, but I grabbed his arm. The passenger door of the van was open now. I'm sure it hadn't been before. A figure moved among the shadows of the woods, too far away to make out clearly. And then Tommy stumbled out from between the trees. His face was white as paper, no trace of his cigarette. He was moving fast and almost running, looking back every few steps as if something were chasing him. "Get in the car," he said, his voice barely audible. "Get in the car. Now." His whole body was trembling, and his shoes had something dark on them. Mud, maybe, or who knows what. We didn't ask. Seeing his eyes was enough. Jake fumbled for the keys while the rest of us climbed in a rush. Tommy threw himself into the back seat and curled up on the floor. Jake started the engine, and that's when I saw it. Movement beside the van. A man stepped out, tall, wearing coveralls and boots. He was dragging something behind him, wrapped in a blue tarp that left a dark stain on the asphalt. The shape was unmistakably the size of a person. Our headlights lit him up just as Jake threw the car into reverse, and for an instant our eyes met. His face was ordinary, bland except for one thing. He had no expression at all. He let go of what he was dragging and started walking toward us. Jake hit the gas like our lives depended on it, because they did. The Explorer fishtailed as it shot back onto the highway, the tires screaming against the asphalt. Tommy stayed curled up on the floor of the back seat, breathing in jagged bursts like he couldn't catch his breath. "He killed her," he kept repeating over and over. I saw him do it. In the woods. He had a hammer or something. God, there was so much blood. Carlos untwisted around in his seat, stared out the rear window, trying to make out something in the darkness. At first there was nothing, just the empty night. But a couple of minutes later, a single light appeared in the distance, one headlight. The van had only one working. Jake pushed the accelerator until the speedometer hit over 90, then 100. The old Explorer shook like it was about to come apart, but that light kept getting closer. "What exactly did you see?" I asked Tommy, struggling to keep my voice steady. He sat up a little, still staring toward the window. I went farther than I thought. I needed to pee. I got to a clearing and saw the van parked there, hidden among the trees. The guy was standing over someone, a woman. I think she was already dead. She wasn't moving, but he hit her again, just to make sure. Then he started wrapping her in that tarp. Tommy's voice cracked. He saw me. I'm sure he saw me. I tried to back away without making a sound, but I stepped on a branch. He looked at me and smiled. The headlight was close enough now that we could make out the silhouette of the vehicle. It wasn't trying to pass us. It simply kept the same speed, following us like a shadow. Jake suddenly swerved onto an exit without warning, the tires skidding, trying to lose him. But the van followed. Now we were on a county road, narrower, unlit, with no houses in sight, just endless cornfields on both sides. Then the vehicle sped up and rammed us from behind. The Explorer jolted hard. Jake almost lost control. Carlos desperately tried to get a signal on his phone to call 911. Nothing. The van hit us again, harder. This time we heard metal crumple. "There," I shouted, pointing at a glowing sign in the distance. "A gas station." Jake didn't hesitate. He floored it, the engine roaring like it was about to blow. For an instant, the van fell back, and I thought maybe we'd lost it. But then it switched on its high beams, blinding us. It lunged to the side and trying to force us off the road. Jake yanked the wheel hard to the right, and the car slid onto the shoulder, kicking up a spray of gravel. The gas station turned out to be one of those 24-hour truck stops, brightly lit and busy even at 4 in the morning. Jake tore into the lot at full speed, barely missing a diesel pump. We all bolted out of the car and rushed for the door. When I looked back, I saw the van stopped at the edge of the property, just outside the circle of light. The driver stayed inside, watching us. Inside, everything looked normal. truckers drinking coffee, half-asleep travelers, ordinary people unaware of what we'd just been through. Carlos found a security guard and started babbling, telling him about the murder. The chase is everything. The guard seemed doubtful until he saw our faces. 4 college guys drenched in sweat, shaking. Then he called for backup on his radio while we huddled near the coffee machines. I looked outside. The van stayed motionless for a minute, maybe 2, and then it backed away slowly, disappearing into the darkness. 20 minutes later, 2 state police cruisers arrived. They took our statements with that calm professionalism of people who have heard similar stories too many times. They called in more units to search the rest area. We stayed at that station for 3 hours, drinking coffee and jumping every time someone opened the door. Around 7 in the morning, one of the officers came back with news. They had found the scene Tommy described. Blood in the clearing, drag marks, tire tracks from a van. But no body, no van, no driver. They issued a statewide alert and told us that later we'd need to go to the station to look at photos and possibly work with a sketch artist. The Explorer had a smashed bumper and paint scraped along the driver's side, proof that it had really happened, that we weren't just 4 young guys with too much imagination. We finally made it to Chicago, after giving our official statements and having the car inspected. Over the following weeks, the police called us several times with updates. Apparently, they had found similar scenes at other rest areas, cases going back several years. The same pattern, the same type of van spotted in the area. They never managed to catch him. Tommy moved back in with his family in Nebraska. He said he couldn't stand being away from home after what happened. Jake, for his part, never drove at night again. Carlos became a true crime podcast fanatic, obsessed with finding cases like ours. And me, I'm still living in Chicago, working that job at the tech company. But I've never taken that route again. Sometimes I check the news, looking for stories about murders at rest areas, wondering if he's still out there, driving, searching for his next victim. The detective in charge of our case retired last year, but before she left, she called me. She said we were the lucky ones, the ones who managed to get away. She also told me something that still keeps me up at night. In all those years, they had found 12 bodies, all young women, all killed the same way Tommy described that night. That's when I understood what it truly meant to have been there, at that moment. Because if we hadn't arrived when we did, there would have been 13. Story 2. I was 23 years old and had just finished college. I was driving my old Toyota Corolla from Albuquerque to Los Angeles to start my first real job at a marketing agency. It was late September 2022. One of those desert nights when the temperature drops more than 30 degrees after sunset, and the sky feels so close you can almost brush the stars. I'd been on the road for about 6 hours, surviving on energy drinks and whatever podcast could keep me awake. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of me, nothing but darkness, and every so often, the faint taillights of a car disappearing in the distance. I felt invincible then. Like nothing bad could happen to someone who believed she had her whole life under control. My parents had warned me about how dangerous it was to drive alone through the desert at night, but I ignored them with that naive confidence only people who have never faced real danger can have. Near 2 in the morning, already past the Arizona border, my bladder started protesting urgently. I'd been holding it for over an hour, hoping to reach a bigger town, but the next sign announced services, and I couldn't take it anymore. The exit led to a lonely gas station, one of those relics from another era, with flickering fluorescent lights and pumps that probably hadn't been updated since the 90s. A faded sign read, "Desert Stop, open 24 hours." With peeling letters and missing chunks of paint, there was only one other vehicle there, an old rusted pickup truck, parked crooked beside the air compressor. I pulled up to pump 3, the one closest to the building, and turned off the engine. Through the dirty windows, I could see the Clark, hunched behind the counter, his face lit by the blue glow of his phone. The place gave me a bad feeling, but nature was more urgent than my instincts. I took my keys, but I left my purse on the passenger seat. Mistake number 1. The desert air hit me like icy water when I stepped out, and somewhere in the distance I heard coyotes howling. My sandals slapped against the cracked asphalt as I hurried toward the entrance. The glass doors were covered with handwritten signs advertising cold beer and fresh coffee. The letters faded to a pale blue. The door chime screeched horribly when I pushed it open, like metal scraping metal. The clerk, a man in his 40s wearing a greasy cap, barely looked up from his screen. The bathroom was in the back, past shelves of dusty snacks and candy bars that looked like they'd been sitting there forever. The key was tied to a block of wood the size of a brick with the word "ladies" carved into it. I remember thinking how disgusting it must be, how many hands had touched it. The bathroom was exactly what I expected. A single stall whose door didn't close right, walls covered in graffiti, and a mirror so scratched it barely reflected. The fluorescent light buzzed and flickered, throwing strange shadows that made me hurry. I did what I had to do as quickly as possible, trying to touch as little as I could. The soap dispenser was empty, so I washed with water only and dried my hands on my jeans. When I came out, I noticed something was different. The clerk was no longer behind the counter. He had moved to the window, staring out at the parking lot. His posture was tense, like he was watching something closely. I followed his gaze, and only saw my car under the lot lights. I set the bathroom key down on the counter with a hard clack and headed for the exit, desperate to get away from that unsettling place. The cold air hit me again as I pushed through the doors, and that was when I saw him. There was a man sitting in my driver's seat. He was just there, perfectly still, his hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead like the car belonged to him. At first, my brain didn't understand what I was seeing. I even took a few steps closer before reality hit me. That stranger, that unknown man, was inside my locked car. He wore a worn denim jacket with stains on the front, even from about 20 feet away. I could see his long, dirty hair hanging over his shoulders. My purse was no longer on the passenger seat. The rational part of my mind screamed at me to go back inside and ask for help. But my legs moved on their own, like they didn't belong to me. Maybe it was shock, maybe just stupidity. But when I snapped out of it, I was already standing beside the car door, staring at him through the glass. He turned his head slowly toward me, and I will never forget his face. His eyes were such a pale gray that, under the station lights, they looked almost white. A scar ran across his face from his left eyebrow to his jaw, pulling the corner of his mouth into a kind of permanent sneer. Then he smiled. Not a normal smile, but a slow, deliberate stretching of the lips that made me shiver. With complete calm, as if we were old friends, he reached out and pressed the unlock button. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the night. He opened the door and stepped out, holding my purse in his right hand. He was taller than I'd imagined, maybe 6'3", so thin he looked almost bony. The smell hit me immediately. Sweat mixed with something chemical, like thinner or fresh paint. "Nice night for a drive," he said, in a soft voice, almost sweet, which only made him more terrifying. I tried to scream, but not a sound came out. Fear had clamped my throat shut. In that instant, my survival instinct finally kicked in. I spun around and ran, my flip-flops flying off my feet in the first few steps. The cold, rough asphalt tore at the skin on the soles of my feet. But I didn't care. I only cared about reaching the door. Behind me, I heard the heavy thud of his boots, fast, closing in. I was less than 10 feet from the entrance when he caught me. He grabbed a fistful of my hair and yanked back so hard I felt my neck crack. I hit the ground with a dull thud. The pavement scraped my elbow raw, tearing off skin. I finally managed to scream, a sound more ragged and desperate than anything I had ever made. He lunged immediately. He clamped a hand over my mouth and wrapped the other arm around my waist, pinning me in place. I bit his palm as hard as I could and tasted blood, metallic on my tongue. He swore and loosened his grip just enough for me to scream again. Through the store window, I saw him, the clerk. He was standing there watching. He had his phone in his hand, but he wasn't calling anyone. He was just staring, motionless, with an empty expression, like it was a show. The man started dragging me back toward my car. My bare feet scraped uselessly across the ground, leaving a red trail on the pavement. I tried to grab anything, the air hose, a trash can. I even tried hooking my fingers into a crack in the asphalt. Nothing worked. He was too strong, and I was starting to lose strength. My throat burned from screaming, and black spots began to crowd my vision. This is how I'm going to die, I thought. In a gas station in the middle of nowhere, and that man behind the counter is just going to watch. But then I heard it, the deep roar of a diesel engine. Powerful headlights swept across the lot as a semi-truck turned off the road and pulled in. The man dragging me froze. His grip loosened for a split second as he turned his head. The truck came to a stop with a hiss of air brakes, and the driver's door opened before it had even fully stopped. A woman jumped down, maybe around 50, strong and sturdy, wearing a flannel shirt and work boots. One look was all she needed to understand what was happening. "Let her go," she roared. Her voice boomed like thunder. In one hand, she held something metallic. Later, I learned it was a lug wrench. The man released me immediately, and I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for air. He looked back and forth between us, calculating his chances. But the trucker was already moving toward him, the iron raised like a bat. "I'm only going to say this once," she growled. "Let her go and get out of here before I split your head open." Behind her, and the truck was still running, the CB radio crackling with voices. She must have called for help as she pulled in. The man took one step back, then another. He dropped my purse on the ground and raised his hands, pretending to surrender. But his eyes never left mine, and that horrible smile twisted his face again. "We'll see each other again," he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. Then he turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness beyond the reach of the lights. The trucker didn't chase him. She crouched beside me, her rough hand surprisingly gentle as she helped me sit up. "Are you okay, honey? Did he hurt you badly?" she asked, her tone completely different now, warm, almost motherly. I tried to speak, but only a hoarse rasp came out. I pointed at my throat, unable to form words. She understood immediately. "Don't talk, sweetheart. We're going inside and calling the real police," she said, shooting a look of disgust toward the clerk. "That piece of trash obviously isn't going to do a thing." I tried to stand, but the moment my ruined feet touched the ground, I nearly collapsed. Without hesitation, the woman scooped me up like I weighed nothing and carried me to her trunk. She set me in the passenger seat and pulled a first aid kit from the back compartment. As she cleaned my feet and wrapped them in gauze, she kept talking, trying to calm me down. She told me her name was Brenda, that she'd been driving trucks for 30 years, and that she'd seen enough of the world to recognize when something bad was happening. "That man," she said as she grabbed her phone, "I've seen him before, a couple of weeks ago, at a stop near Flagstaff. He was hanging around the women's bathroom and security kicked him out." She dialed 911 and put it on speaker so I could hear. The police arrived in less than 20 minutes. Apparently, a state trooper had been only a few miles away. By then, I'd gotten a little of my voice back, though it sounded rough, like a harsh whisper. I gave my statement right there, sitting in Brenda's truck cab while she held my hand. The officer who arrived, Agent Fitzgerald, was young, but it was obvious he knew what he was doing. He took photos of my injuries, of the blood trail on the pavement, and collected the gas station security footage. The clerk tried to slip away, but Fitzgerald stopped him with a look that didn't allow arguments. It turned out that man had watched everything from the beginning, how the attacker forced my car lock with a tool, how he rummaged through my things and sat down in the driver's seat, and he did absolutely nothing. "I didn't want to get into trouble," was all he said, shrugging. The agent's expression hardened with every word. When the police entered the attacker's description into the system, something chilling came back. A man matching those exact features, even the facial scar, was wanted in connection with 3 kidnappings in Arizona and New Mexico. His name was Robert Henley. He'd been attacking young women traveling alone for months, always at isolated gas stations or rest areas. But the worst part was what they found when they searched the area. Behind the station, hidden among some bushes, was his rusted pickup truck. In the bed, under a tarp, they found plastic zip ties, duct tape, and a shovel. There was also a notebook with detailed notes about different women, descriptions, license plates, the routes they were taking. My license plate wasn't written down yet, which meant I had been an improvised opportunity. Later, Agent Fitzgerald told me I'd been lucky, very lucky. The other 3 women who crossed paths with Robert Henley were never found. Brenda stayed with me the entire time. She didn't leave me alone for a second. She even followed me to the next town to make sure I got a room at a safe motel. Before she left, she gave me her phone number and made me promise I'd call her as soon as I got to Los Angeles. The police confiscated my car as evidence, so I had to rent another one to finish the trip. They caught Robert Henley 2 days later at another gas station, about 50 miles farther west. He was trying to do the exact same thing to another woman, but that time the clerk called 911 immediately. Henley was arrested without resistance. He's serving a life in prison now, and the 3 missing women still haven't been found. Sometimes I still have to travel to California for work, and even though the desert is the same, I'm not. I don't stop at lonely gas stations anymore, and I always keep my phone charged and the doors locked. And every time I see a semi-truck pass on the highway, I think of Brenda, the woman who didn't hesitate for a second to stop and save the life of a stranger. Story 3. I grew up in a small town in Utah, and I always thought the worst thing about driving at night was hitting a deer on the road. But all of that changed completely during spring break in 2017, when my younger sister, Megan Ux, and I decided to visit our aunt in Phoenix. I was 23 at the time, working as a dental hygienist in Salt Lake City, and Megan had just turned 21. She was studying nursing at BYU. We had made that trip dozens of times, usually leaving after my Friday shift to avoid weekend traffic. That night we left around 8:30 p.m., planning to reach Phoenix around 3 in the morning. The weather was clear, the highway empty, and we had a cooler full of Red Bulls and those gas station taquitos Megan loved so much. We were already past Cedar City, probably about 2 hours in, when I first noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. At that hour, the highway was practically a desert, just us, and now and then a trucker heading south. That car had been behind us for about 15 minutes, always keeping the same distance, never getting too close, never falling back. Megan was dozing in the passenger seat with her feet up on the dashboard, despite my constant complaints about how dangerous it was. On the radio, a late-night show about conspiracy theories was playing. The host was talking about government surveillance, ironic, considering what was about to happen. Suddenly, the car behind us sped up, closing the distance in seconds. Then red and blue lights began flashing. The first thing that struck me as strange was the vehicle itself. It wasn't a patrol car. It had no markings, no light bar on the roof, just those portable lights that stick to the dashboard, the kind anyone can buy online. Still, I'd heard about unmarked cars, especially on long stretches where they often pull over speeders. I nudged Megan awake and started slowing down, looking for a safe place to pull over. The shoulder was narrow, barely wide enough for a car, and beyond it there was only sagebrush and darkness. Megan sat up groggily, rubbing her eyes. "Were you speeding?" she asked. "No," I said. "I've had cruise control at 75 miles an hour since we left Cedar City." The unmarked car followed close as we pulled onto the gravel. In my side mirror, I saw a man get out of the vehicle. He was tall, maybe around 6 feet 3 inches, wearing dark jeans and a black jacket with no insignia. He wasn't in uniform and had no visible badge. He walked with a strange stiffness, almost exaggerated, like someone trying to look more official than he was. The way he moved put every nerve in my body on edge. He had one hand on his hip, where he might have been carrying a weapon, though I couldn't see one, and in the other he held a flashlight, pointed at the ground instead of using it to light his way. When he reached my window, I rolled it down only about 2 inches. Up close I could see his face clearly, clean-shaven, in his mid-40s, with sunken eyes and a peculiar scar that ran from his left ear down to his jaw, as if someone had tried to draw a question mark into his skin. "License and registration," he said, but his voice didn't sound right. It was too low, almost a whisper, as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. He didn't identify himself as an officer or explain why he was stopping us. He simply waited. Megan had gone completely still, breathing fast, trembling slightly. My purse was in the back seat, so I turned to reach for it. Then he spoke again. "Get out of the vehicle, both of you." The way he said it made my blood run cold. It wasn't a request, it was an order. His free hand returned to his hip, his fingers tapping on something I still couldn't make out. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. He just repeated it, louder. "Get out of the vehicle now." Megan grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. Neither of us moved. And then we saw it. Another set of headlights approaching from behind. Another car was coming up in the left lane, slowing down. This time I could clearly see the words Sheriff's Department reflecting in the headlights on the side of the vehicle. The man at my window saw it too. His expression changed instantly. His shoulders tightened, his jaw clenched, and he took a step back. The sheriff's patrol car stopped directly behind the unmarked vehicle. In my rear view mirror, I saw a uniformed deputy get out. She was shorter than him, solidly built, with one hand already on the radio at her belt. The moment she saw him, she drew her weapon. "Step away from the vehicle and put your hands where I can see them," she shouted, her voice steady, cutting through the roar of the wind. The scarred man didn't run. He stayed still, staring at me through the window with an expression I'll never forget. The look of a predator interrupted just before an attack. Then chaos broke loose. The deputy kept shouting orders while calling for backup on the radio. The man raised his hand slowly, but he didn't take his eyes off us, especially Megan. Even with a gun trained on him, he looked frustrated, not scared. She ordered him to walk backward toward the sound of her voice, then kneel on the ground. The kind of procedure you usually see on the news. But there was something in her tone, the urgency, the tension, that made it clear this wasn't a routine stop. She knew exactly who he was. "You two, stay in the car and do not open the doors for any reason," she shouted to us without taking her eyes off him. She didn't need to tell us twice. I slammed the lock button so hard I thought I might break it. Through the windshield, I watched him comply with an eerie calm, not saying a word, while the deputy kept her weapon steady. Within minutes, the empty highway turned into a scene out of a movie. 3 more patrol cars arrived with sirens on, flooding everything with red and blue light. Officers surrounded the suspect's vehicle and searched it with flashlights while he, now handcuffed, sat in the back of the first deputy's patrol car. The deputy who had saved us walked over. Her badge read Deputy Vasquez. Up close, I could see relief mixed with anger in her face. "You did the right thing by not getting out of the car," she said, glancing toward the man in her cruiser. "We've been looking for him for 3 months. Nathan Crow," she explained, "though that isn't even his real name, just the latest of several aliases." She told us he'd been running the same scam across 3 states, Utah, Nevada, and Colorado. Always the same pattern. Young women, alone or in pairs, pulled over in the middle of the night by a supposed police officer. He ordered them out of the car, and when they complied, they vanished. Up to that point, they had confirmed 4 attempted kidnappings, though Deputy Vasquez was sure there were more unreported cases. The search of his vehicle revealed everything we needed to know about how close we'd been to disaster. They found zip ties, duct tape, a stolen police scanner, and the magnetic lights anyone can buy online. In the glove compartment, there were multiple fake IDs, different names, but the same face with that question mark scar. And worst of all, a notebook filled with license plate numbers, car descriptions, and notes about potential stops. Deputy Vasquez wouldn't let us see it, but the look on her face was enough to understand. Among the items, they also found a full police uniform, with a badge so convincing that anyone would have believed it was real in the dark. He was escalating, getting bolder. The deputy told us that in Colorado he had managed to get a woman out of her car before a truck driver happened to pass and scared him off. The victim was missing for 6 hours until they found her alive, deeply traumatized, abandoned at a rest area 50 miles down the road. Megan hadn't said a word since the explanation began. She just squeezed my hand, tears running silently down her cheeks. Deputy Vasquez asked if we wanted to press charges. At the time, the question felt absurd, until she explained that many victims chose not to, too terrified to face court or relive what happened. We said yes immediately. She took our statements right there on the side of the road while the desert wind rattled the sagebrush around us. Every detail felt important now. How long he'd followed us, the exact words he'd said, the question mark scar. Other officers photographed our car, the exact spot where we'd pulled over, and even the tire marks in the gravel. One of them remarked that Crow if that was even his real name, was probably monitoring police channels to know when patrol units were far away or tied up on other calls. If Deputy Vasquez hadn't been returning from a domestic violence call just 5 miles away, the story would have ended very differently. They kept us for almost 2 hours, making sure we were okay and that we weren't going into shock. Before we left, Vasquez gave us her direct number and made us promise we'd call as soon as we got to Phoenix. She also arranged for a patrol car to escort us to the next town, just in case. As we got ready to go, I watched them load the man, Nathan Crow, or whoever he was, into a police transport van. Even in handcuffs when he looked back toward our car. Even from that distance, I could see his lips moving, murmuring something I couldn't hear. And honestly, I'm grateful I didn't. Deputy Vasquez noticed too and stepped between him and us, blocking his stare. "Don't give him another second of your energy," she said firmly. "He's going to be locked up for a long time." Later, we learned he was already on probation for an assault committed in 2015, which meant any new crime automatically violated his previous sentence, with the attempted kidnapping charges and impersonating an officer added on. Vasquez estimated he would spend at least 15 to 20 years behind bars. The rest of the drive to Phoenix was surreal. Megan and I barely spoke. We just kept our hands intertwined on the center console while I drove, both eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. Every car that appeared behind us made my heart race. We stopped once for gas in St. George, but I couldn't bring myself to get out of the vehicle. Megan had to do it while I stayed inside, doors locked, watching every movement in the lot. We arrived at our aunt's house just as the sun was coming up. We were exhausted, shaking, but alive. The following months were hard. I had recurring nightmares about that scar and the flash of red lights in the darkness. After Megan graduated, she requested to work exclusively day shifts. She couldn't stand driving at night. 6 months later, we testified at trial alongside 3 other women who had also been targets. He was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 18 years in prison. The prosecutor told us our case had been the strongest because we'd stayed inside the car and Deputy Vasquez had caught him in the act. Today, I still make that drive to Phoenix from time to time, but never at night. And every time someone asks me what to do if something feels off during a traffic stop, I always say the same thing. Trust your instincts. Real officers won't be offended if you call 911 to confirm their identity. Because sometimes that small doubt, that window rolled down only a couple inches, that lock button pressed in time, can be the difference between living and not being able to tell the story. Story 4. The gas station mechanic had fingernails blackened with grease and a gap between his front teeth that made a faint whistle every time he spoke. Brendan and I had stopped at his shop on the outskirts of Holbrook because the Ford Ranger pickup we'd borrowed from. His older brother was making a metallic noise every time we hit 60 miles per hour. The guy assured us it was nothing serious, just a loose heat shield. And then, almost with a crooked smile, he told us we could save about 2 hours getting to Phoenix if we took something he called the Old Cattle Road instead of staying on the highway. He sketched a makeshift map on the back of the receipt, leaving oil stains on the paper as he drew lines with a chewed-up pencil. He told us to turn at mile marker 47, follow the dirt road about 20 kilometers until we saw a yellow water tower, and then turn left. Easy, he said, and us, already running late because we'd spent too long at the petrified forest that morning, decided to trust him. It was around 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. The sun was brutal, even in March, and the truck's air conditioning barely worked. We drove with the windows down, music blasting, feeling like the two freest 20-somethings in the world. Brandon had this habit of sticking his hand out the window and letting it surf the air while pointing out weird rock formations or abandoned houses we passed. We'd been roommates since freshman year of college, bonded by late-night FIFA tournaments and our shared hatred for our calculus professor. This trip was, for us, the last big adventure before facing adulthood. Internships, jobs, responsibilities. Neither of us imagined that before sunset we'd be begging to get out of there alive. Mile marker 47 showed up faster than expected. The exit was barely an opening in the metal guardrail, with a dirt track stretching into the desert. No signs, no directions. Brandon checked the pencil-marked map while I slowed down. Yes, it was the right place. The road started out fairly passable. Packed dirt, a few occasional potholes. In the first few miles, we passed a couple abandoned structures. An old rusted gas pump standing like the skeleton of an animal, and a collapsed cabin with its door hanging from a single hinge. Brandon pulled out his phone and started taking pictures, saying his Instagram followers were going to lose their minds over this. The landscape was completely different from anything we knew in Michigan. Reddish rocks, twisted shrubs, and tall cacti that seemed to wave at us. After about 10 kilometers, things started getting weird. The road narrowed and became rougher, forcing me to slow to around 15 miles per hour. We hadn't seen a single vehicle since leaving the highway, and our phones had lost signal about 8 kilometers back. The yellow water tower the mechanic had mentioned still hadn't appeared. Instead, we began noticing something new. Small improvised crosses along the road, made from old fence posts wrapped in sun-faded cloth. At first there were only a few, then they appeared every 100 meters. Some had plastic flowers bleached by the heat. Others had keys hanging from them, ribbons, even children's toys. Brandon stopped taking pictures. He went quiet, which was very unlike him. The radio started giving nothing but static, so I turned it off. The only sounds were the engine and the crunch of tires on dirt. We'd gone about 20 kilometers, and the tower still wasn't in sight. According to the map, we should have found it by now, but there was only more desert and a line of red rocks on the horizon. Brandon suggested turning back, but I insisted on going just a little farther. We'd come too far to quit, and besides, turning around on that narrow road was tricky. That was when I saw it. A pink sneaker hanging from the branch of a mesquite tree. It couldn't have been bigger than a size 3. The shoe of a small child. Then there were more. Boots, sandals, tennis shoes, every size and style, hanging from trees like strange fruit. They swayed in the wind, making a faint squeak. Some were torn apart. Others looked almost new. There were hundreds of them, spread across a dozen trees. Brandon grabbed my arm, his voice higher than I'd ever heard it. "Stop the truck." I killed the engine. We sat completely still, staring at that macabre forest of shoes slowly turning beneath the sun. The farm appeared after the next bend, and it was like slamming face first into a nightmare. The main house was half collapsed. The roof caved in on one side and the windows reduced to dark holes. But that wasn't what stole our breath. It was the barn. The entire structure was covered in doll parts. Arms, legs, heads, nailed into the old wooden siding with no apparent pattern. In the yard, someone had arranged dozens of baby strollers in a perfect circle, all facing inward. They were all kinds. Modern ones with plastic wheels and also old metal prams with big rusted hoops. From each corner of the barn hung mobiles made of bones, or something far too much like bones, clacking together with a hollow, constant sound that seemed like it would never end. The road was blocked by a wheelless school bus, its yellow paint peeling off in strips. On its side, someone had painted large red letters, Matthew 19:14. Brandon was breathing hard, almost hyperventilating. I threw the truck into reverse, ready to get out of there as fast as possible, but the road was too narrow to turn quickly. And then I saw it, in the hayloft window of the barn, a silhouette, a motionless figure, perfectly upright, staring down at us. It didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. It was just there, like a human scarecrow. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its gaze pinned on me. Brandon saw it too and made a sound I'd never heard from him before, something between a whimper and a sob. I hit the gas and started backing up as fast as I could, not worrying about staying on the track. The tires kicked up clouds of dust, and through them I could still see that figure, unmoving in the barn window. But then something moved near the house. A door I hadn't noticed before began to open slowly. The hinges squealed with a long, rusty sound that carried through the dry desert air. Someone was coming out. They moved with a clumsy, uneven gait, as if their legs didn't work quite right. And then I heard another sound, this time behind us, the roar of an engine. I looked in the rearview mirror and my stomach dropped. A pickup truck had appeared out of nowhere, parked sideways across the road about 50 meters back, blocking our only way out. It was an old Chevy, primer gray, with mismatched doors. We hadn't heard it coming. It was just there, as if it had risen out of the ground. Two men got out of it. Even from that distance, I could see both of them were holding something in their hands. Brandon started repeating, his voice cracking, "Come on, come on, come on, go." I floored it and tried to crank the wheel to find a gap between the bus and a cluster of rusted farm machines. The woman who had come out of the house was getting closer. Now I could see her clearly. She wore a long, dirty dress, and she was dragging something behind her, leaving a line in the dirt. The men were advancing too. They weren't running. They walked slowly, confidently, with the sinister calm of people who know their prey has nowhere to go. One of them wore what looked like a butcher's apron, stained a dark color that didn't need explaining. Finally, I found a gap between the bus and a rusted tractor, barely wide enough to squeeze through. I yanked the wheel with everything I had and accelerated. The side mirror clipped the bus, tearing out a metallic screech. We bounced over something. I never found out what. And suddenly we were off the farm property, flying down a side path we hadn't seen before. It was even narrower than the first one, barely more than 2 tire tracks through the brush. Brandon was twisted around, watching it through the back window. "They're following us," he said. "Both trucks, and they know the land better than we do." The trail twisted through a stand of dead trees, their white trunks sticking up like bones. I was driving too fast for the conditions, the truck skidding in turns, slamming over rocks, but I couldn't slow down. In the mirror, I could see the gray Chevy holding the distance effortlessly, and behind it another truck, maybe the one the woman had come from. The speedometer bounced between 40 and 50 miles per hour, though it felt like 100. The road suddenly spilled out onto a wider, better-maintained dirt road. I didn't know which way to go, so I turned right and prayed it would lead us back to the highway. Brandon tried using his phone, holding it up like that could attract a signal bar. Nothing. The sun was starting to drop, and the shadows stretched across the road like black fingers. In the mirror, I saw dust clouds rising far behind us. They were still coming. And then Brandon saw it, a bullet hole in the truck's tailgate, fresh. From the size, it looked recent, probably fired during the chase. Neither of us had heard a shot. The road started climbing into low hills, and I pushed the old Ranger's engine as hard as it could go. The dashboard rattled, the temperature gauge edged toward red, and the engine made a sound that felt more like begging than power. We rounded a sharp bend and almost collided head-on with a sheriff's car coming the other way. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded sideways on the road, kicking up a cloud of dust that swallowed us. The deputy got out with his hand on his gun, and that was when I realized how we must have looked. Two guys coated in dust, shaking, wild-eyed, driving like maniacs through the desert. Brandon jumped out before the truck had fully stopped, stumbling toward the officer while trying, through sobs, to explain the barn, the shoes, the men, and the woman chasing us. His words tumbled out, barely coherent. The sheriff, his badge read Officer Briggs, raised a hand to calm him, then looked down the road we'd come from. Nothing. No dust. No vehicles. Just an empty strip of desert fading into the horizon. Briggs walked around our truck, stopped in front of the bullet hole, and ran a finger along the edge. Then, without taking his eyes off the metal, he told us to start from the beginning. I told him everything. The mechanic, the map on the receipt, the shoes, the crosses, the barn covered in dolls, the woman in the dress, and the armed men. While I talked, he kept watching the road, and I noticed his hand never left his weapon. When I finished, he was silent for a few seconds. Then he said, in a low but steady voice, "You're going to follow me back to the highway. You got lucky, boys. Very lucky." He wouldn't go into details. He only repeated that the area we'd driven through was private property and that the people living out there didn't usually welcome intruders. I didn't ask anything else. Something in his tone told me he didn't want me to. We followed him for about 20 minutes along roads I never could have found on my own. Neither Brandon nor I said a word the entire time. When we finally saw the asphalt of the interstate, the rush of relief was so strong I almost wanted to cry. The sheriff stopped at the on-ramp, walked up to my window, and said, "Go straight to Phoenix. Don't stop, and don't take shortcuts. Stay on the main roads." He was already turning away when he added something that still gives me chills. "And if you're smart, you'll forget about filing any report on this. Sometimes it's better to just be grateful you got out alive." He waited until we merged onto the highway before turning around and heading back the way we'd fled. Brandon and I drove for 3 hours without stopping until we reached a brightly lit service plaza inside Phoenix city limits, full of people, noise, life. Only then did we let ourselves breathe for real. We never made it to Texas. The next morning, we turned around and drove straight back to Michigan, taking shifts at the wheel and stopping only for gas. We never filed a report. We didn't even tell Jake, Brendan's brother, about the bullet hole. We told him it had already been there, that we just hadn't noticed it before. But sometimes, late at night, I search online for any trace of that place. The crosses, the hanging shoes, the doll barn. I never find anything, as if it doesn't exist. Maybe that's for the best, because deep down, I'm convinced of something. That mechanic knew exactly where he was sending us, and most likely, we weren't the first ones he sent down that road. I'm sure of it. Story 5. The drive from Reno to Houston was supposed to be simple. 30 hours of highway, endless podcasts, and gas station coffee. Nothing out of the ordinary for me. I'd spent years working as a medical equipment sales rep, used to long distances and asphalt. But that trip, in October 2016, felt different from the moment I started the engine. Maybe it was the divorce papers sitting on the passenger seat, or the feeling of starting over at 34 with no clear direction. Whatever it was, Something in the air already hinted that this drive wouldn't be like the others. I'd been driving for about 12 hours when I stopped at a massive truck stop just after crossing the state line. The place buzzed with activity, endless rows of semis parked like sleeping giants, families stretching their legs, truckers going in and out of the convenience store. The neon sign for Rosie's Diner, open 24 hours, flickered against the darkening sky, and my stomach reminded me I hadn't eaten anything decent since breakfast. Inside, the diner had that timeless atmosphere all roadside restaurants share. Red vinyl booths, checkered flooring, and the unmistakable smell of bacon grease that seemed to have soaked into the walls since the 70s. I picked a booth by the window, where I could keep an eye on my car. The waitress who came over was young, couldn't have been more than 22. She had bleached blonde hair pulled into a high bun, and her name tag read, Darlene. She had striking green eyes, the color of sea glass, and a genuine smile, the kind that seems to come from someone who actually enjoys what they do. I ordered chicken fried steak with mashed potatoes and coffee, and while she wrote it down, I noticed the man sitting at the counter. He was around 45, wearing a faded denim jacket over a plain white t-shirt. Nothing about him stood out, except the intensity with which he watched Darlene. Not the look of admiration, more like surveillance. He tracked her movements with his eyes the way a cat watches a bird through glass. Halfway through my meal, the man got up and slid into the booth directly behind mine. I heard the vinyl squeal as he settled in, and immediately I felt the hair rise on my arms. He ordered pie and milk. I remember thinking how strange that combination was for dinner. Then he started talking to me through the back of the seat. "Long trip?" he asked in a rough voice, like a heavy smoker. I answered with a distracted yeah, trying to focus on my plate, but he kept going, asking where I was headed, whether I was traveling alone, what kind of car I drove. Each question sounded less like casual conversation and more like data collection. When I mentioned Houston, he gave a short, broken laugh and said, "What a coincidence. I'm headed there too. Maybe we'll run into each other again." At that moment, Darlene came back to refill my coffee, and the man's demeanor changed instantly. His reflection in the window showed an empty, almost extinguished expression, like his friendly mask had dropped. She must have noticed too, because she moved away quickly, but I caught something on her face that chilled my blood, a mix of recognition and fear. I tried to get her attention when she brought the check. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but she avoided looking at me directly. The man behind me had gone quiet, but I could feel his breathing, steady, heavy, too close. My food sat like a weight in my stomach, and even though I'd barely touched the coffee, I left a 20 on the table and stood up. As I passed his booth, he looked straight at me. His eyes were a pale gray, almost translucent. He smiled. "Have a good trip," he said, emphasizing the word good in a way that made my skin crawl. The parking lot felt different as soon as I stepped outside. Darker, even though the overhead lights were still on, bathing the asphalt in a cold, artificial white. I sped up without realizing it, gripping my keys between my fingers while I scanned the area. Through the windows, I could still see the diner interior. The man had returned to the counter, position where he could watch both the dining room and the hallway leading to the bathrooms and kitchen. Darlene was serving another customer, but her eyes kept flicking toward that hallway again and again, like she was planning an escape route. I slid into my car with the engine running and hesitating. Part of me wanted to go back and warn her, but warn her about what? Exactly. A weird guy, a gut feeling. Under the cold parking lot lights, my concern sounded paranoid, almost ridiculous. Still, I couldn't shake the sharp sense that something horrible was about to happen. I turned on my headlights, pulled out, and drove for 2 hours without stopping, eyes on the road, but my mind stuck in that diner, replaying every detail. The way he changed seats, the way he watched Darlene, his airless laugh, his gray eyes. I stayed at a roadside motel in Amarillo, but I barely slept. I checked the locks 3 times and wedged a chair under the door handle. When I finally closed my eyes, I kept seeing the man's reflection staring at me through the diner window. The next morning, while I ate stale cereal in the motel's common area, the TV mounted on the wall froze my blood. The news showed a reporter standing in front of a familiar building, Rosie's Diner. The plastic spoon dropped from my hand when I heard her words. A 22-year-old waitress was found dead in the employee's restroom. Police suspect homicide. Security cameras show a man following the victim. On the screen, a blurry security image appeared, grainy, indistinct, but unmistakable. The denim jacket, the white t-shirt, that predatory posture. The victim's name, Darlene Foster. She'd worked there for 3 months. She was saving money to go to nursing school. The report said her body was found at 11:47 p.m., less than an hour after I left. The medical examiner determined she'd been strangled with the strings of her own apron. But what truly turned me cold was the timeline. The cameras recorded the man following her down the hallway toward the back of the restaurant at 11:21 p.m., only 15 minutes after I pulled out of the parking lot. If I'd taken longer finishing my coffee, if I'd decided to stay just a little more, would I have been able to stop it? Or would I have just become another victim? Around me, the other motel guests talked about their routes and vacations, completely unaware of the abyss opening in my chest. The news continued, mentioning police were looking for a man in a dark pickup truck. I called the tip line from the motel phone, hands shaking, and told them everything I could remember. That afternoon, a detective named Judith Brennan called me back. Her tone was calm and professional, but the careful attention in her questions made everything feel even more real. She asked specific things, whether the man had scars, tattoos, any distinctive feature, whether he mentioned his destination, whether I saw his vehicle. That was when I remembered a dark blue Ford pickup with Oklahoma plates parked in front of the diner, with a metal toolbox in the bed. On the other end of the line, the detective's silence told me that detail mattered. She asked if I'd be willing to work with a sketch artist over a video call. I spent the next 2 hours describing every feature of that face, so ordinary, and yet so threatening. The gray eyes, the empty expression, the forced smile. Judith thanked me again and again, saying my statement had been very helpful. But as I hung up, I could only think one thing. I'd left her alone with him. The rest of the drive to Houston was a blur. Every turn, every stop, blended into the same image in my mind. The man in the denim jacket, the gray eyes, and Darlene smiling with strained politeness. I caught myself checking the mirrors every few minutes, convinced someone was following me. Every time I saw a dark blue pickup, my heart slammed against my ribs. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. At a rest area in eastern Oklahoma, I saw a blue Ford pickup and nearly had a panic attack. Only when I saw it was driven by an elderly woman with her grandkids did I feel like I could breathe again. That night I reached Houston, but I couldn't bring myself to stay in the hotel I'd booked. I went straight to my sister Gloria's apartment, telling her I was too exhausted to be alone. I didn't mention the murder until 3 days later, when Detective Brennan called with an update. They had arrested a suspect, Douglas Wade Hutchinson, a long-haul truck driver with a history of assaults in 3 states. The sketch I helped create had been key to identifying him. What came next was even more disturbing. During the trial, which I attended by video conference, prosecutors revealed that Douglas had been stalking Darlene for weeks. Every Thursday night, when his route took him through there, he ate at the diner, requested her section, and stayed until nearly closing time. Other waitresses testified that they'd tried to warn her, but Darlene always said she could handle it, that she needed the tips. That night, the night I was there, wasn't a coincidence. He'd been waiting for the perfect moment. Security footage showed that in previous weeks he followed her to her car, lingering as she drove away, measuring timing, testing boundaries. The prosecutor said my presence that night delayed his plans, that he waited until the diner was nearly empty, until Darlene was alone doing her closing tasks. If I hadn't been sitting in the booth in front of his, maybe he would have acted sooner. Douglas was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. I watched the verdict being read on my computer screen. He showed no emotion at all. He just stared forward with those same empty gray eyes that had haunted me since that night. But what truly broke me was hearing Darlene's mother's statement. She said her daughter called her every night after work to tell her she'd gotten home safely. That night she waited until midnight, and when the call never came and she started calling the diner, no one answered. Driving the 40 miles from her home to Rosie's, she arrived to find the patrol cars, the yellow tape, and her daughter's beat-up Honda in the employee parking lot. During her testimony, she looked straight into the camera and said, "Whoever called the tip line gave me the only thing I could have, the certainty that that man can't hurt any other daughter." I closed the laptop and cried for an hour. 7 years have passed, and I still can't eat in a roadside diner. I tried once, a year after the trial. I thought I had to face the fear. But the moment I sat down and the waitress came over with her notepad, I was back in that booth at Rosie's, feeling his breath behind me, hearing the clink of silverware, watching gray eyes track Darlene's every move. I stood up before I even ordered. Sometimes I search her name online, Darlene Foster. I look at the few photos that exist, her graduation portrait, a Facebook picture from the diner where she's laughing with her coworkers. Today she would be 29. Maybe she would have finished nursing school by now. Maybe she'd be married with kids. I think about the 37 minutes between the moment I left the restaurant and the moment he followed her to the bathroom. I know, rationally, that staying wouldn't have changed anything. He'd planned it all. He would have found another moment, another chance. Detective Brennan told me my leaving might have saved my own life, that in Douglas's truck they found items that suggested he was planning multiple victims. But silent nights are still the worst, when the house is quiet and the only sound is the hum of the refrigerator. I see Darlene's strained smile again. I smell the coffee I left unfinished, and I ask myself the same question over and over. And what if, maybe, just maybe, I could have done something more? Story 6. It was the 4th day of a road trip we'd been planning since spring. I was 19, freshly out of community college, and all I wanted was to see the Pacific. There were 4 of us. Dion, my friend, who drove a beat-up teal-green Aerostar van his uncle had given him, Riley, his cousin, and Lenny, Riley's roommate. None of us had ever been farther than Tennessee. We traveled light, split gas costs, took turns driving, and slept in shifts in the back seat. We lived almost entirely on vending machines and cheap value menu burgers. It was a feeling of absolute freedom, grimy and caffeine-fueled, but real. That morning we left a rundown motel in southern New Mexico, right off the highway. Riley was the first one awake. When I stepped outside, he was already out there smoking. The place was depressing. Half the building was boarded up. The parking lot was cracked. And behind it there was only a dusty service road, a gas station, and an old abandoned train depot. We'd checked in the night before under Dion's name, paying $28 between the four of us. I remember the receptionist, a guy with a slight limp, his button-up shirt 2 sizes too big, and a warning we took as a joke at the time. Lock both the deadbolts. Guys like you don't usually stay here. We thought he was just trying to sound mysterious. In daylight, the place looked even worse. The outside Coca-Cola machine had a bullet hole in the plexiglass, and piles of broken hubcaps were stacked beside the dumpster. Still, we were in a good mood. I took a photo of the guys leaning against the van before we left. That photo, something I'd learn later, would end up appearing in every article about the case. We left around 10:30 a.m., planning to get back on the highway west, pass through El Paso, and reach Arizona by sundown. The sun was brutal. Glare on the dashboard made the map hard to read. Riley, in the passenger seat, traced our route with his finger. 40 minutes later, we stopped at a small roadside diner, one of those places with a buzzing sign and a waitress who calls everyone honey. I ordered coffee and a greasy ham sandwich served on bread so soaked in butter it fell apart in my hands. We weren't there more than half an hour. While we ate, Lenny mentioned he had seen a guy hanging around the parking lot, leaning against an old rust-colored truck, staring hard at our van's license plate. He said the man wouldn't stop watching it. We didn't think much of it. We figured he was one of those people who assume out-of-state plates mean tourists with money. The guy never came inside or spoke to us, and when we left, he was gone. I only remember that there was something strange about the way he held himself, an unnatural stillness, like he was posing for a photograph. Later, we joked about it, calling him the New Mexico license plate inspector, and kept driving through miles of flat land and dry brush. Riley fiddled with the radio dial, searching for a station that wasn't just static. At some point after noon, I must have fallen asleep. When I opened my eyes, the world had changed. When I woke up, the van wasn't moving anymore. The silence felt thick, and the landscape around us didn't look like anything we'd seen before. We were parked in what looked like the back of an industrial complex. Rows of corrugated metal buildings, empty loading docks, no signs, no people, no trace of life. The sun had shifted. The light was pale, almost white, and everything looked washed out, like the world had been drained of color. I rubbed my eyes and asked Dion why we'd stopped. He took a long time to answer. He was still sitting behind the wheel, hands unmoving, staring straight ahead. Riley was outside the van, walking in circles, looking at his watch like he was waiting for someone to show up. Lenny was chewing on a straw wrapper in silence. That stood out to me. Lenny was the loudest of all of us, always cracking jokes or making dumb comments. Now, he wasn't saying a word. I asked again what we were doing there. Dion, without looking at me, said, "We're waiting for something. That's all." His tone was flat, like the words didn't carry any weight. I got out, confused. The pavement radiated heat, and the air smelled chemical, like oil or solvent. I walked up to Riley and asked again, "What are we doing here?" He shrugged and said, "It's not that far off the road." Then he added, "Do you remember the guy from the restaurant?" I nodded. "The one by the truck," I said. Riley looked down and said, "I think we're supposed to meet him." I laughed and thinking it was a joke, but he didn't laugh. He just looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. It wasn't fear. It was resignation, like he'd already accepted this was something that had to happen. That was when I noticed all the doors were unlocked. Dion had the key turned halfway in the ignition, but the engine wasn't running. I asked if we'd broken down, if we needed help, but no one answered. Heat shimmered over the asphalt, warping the view. And in the middle of that absolute quiet, I realized something that turned my insides to ice. No one had planned this stop. We didn't know where we were. There were no road signs, and no phone service. Just that empty industrial desert. I pulled my old film camera out of my bag and took a picture of the place, out of habit more than anything. That would be the last photo I took on that trip. When I developed it days later, the frame was almost completely gray, as if the light itself had been swallowed. I went back to the van and opened the cooler to grab a soda. That was when I saw it. A folded napkin was tucked under the windshield wiper. None of us had gotten out since we arrived. I took it and unfolded it. 4 words written in pencil. "You're almost to the west." I recognized all my friends' handwriting, and it didn't match any of them. Riley came up and read over my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He just took the napkin, folded it neatly, and slipped it into his pocket as if it were nothing strange at all. I only wanted to leave. Every cell in my body screamed at me to get out of there, to get back to the highway and forget that place. But no one moved. I climbed back into the van and waited. Minutes passed, or maybe much longer. The air inside the vehicle was suffocating. Riley kept staring at the napkin. Dion had that distant expression of someone trying to remember something that keeps slipping away. Lenny wouldn't stop watching out the rear window, like he was expecting to see someone coming. I broke the silence. "We have to go. Seriously." Dion nodded slowly, turned the key. The engine coughed but didn't start. He tried again. Nothing. I looked at the gas gauge. The tank was almost full. I offered to check under the hood, but Dion replied, without raising his voice, "No, don't." It wasn't an aggressive order, just a firm, absolute refusal. And that's when I knew something had changed in them. They weren't acting like my friends anymore. It was like all of them were waiting for instructions I didn't know about. I grabbed my backpack from the back seat and said I was going to walk to the main road. Riley looked straight at me and said a sentence that still haunts me. "You won't find it." The tone wasn't threatening. It was certainty. Still, I opened the door and stepped out. The air had gone dead. No wind, no birds, no insects. I started walking in a straight line for half an hour, maybe more, but the scenery never changed. The same metal buildings, the same empty docks, the same unchanging silence. I tried to turn back, but I couldn't find anything. No intersection, no diner, no trace of the road we'd come in on. Only that maze of identical structures. When I finally got back to the spot where I'd started, the van was gone. No tire tracks, no distant engine noise, just an empty lot shimmering in the heat. I screamed their names until I lost my voice. Nothing answered. I sat on the ground waiting for something, anything, to happen. The sun sank slowly, throwing long shadows across the pavement. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I opened my eyes, it was night, and I was lying behind another, different building near a loading yard with flickering lights. A truck driver found me around midnight. He said I was dehydrated, disoriented, and wouldn't stop babbling incoherently about my friends, a van, and a note. They took me to a clinic outside El Paso. They hydrated me, asked questions, and called the police. I told them everything. The motel, the guy at the diner, the stop at the complex, The napkin. The officers checked records. They found no report, no accident, no trace of my 3 friends. Nothing. 2 days later, police located Dion's van, a teal-green Ford Aerostar exactly like ours, parked beside a freight terminal on the outskirts of the city. The doors were locked, the keys were still in the ignition, and all our backpacks were inside. On the floor of the passenger seat, they found a fast food bag. The receipt was dated 2 days after they disappeared. Since then, I've told this story maybe 10 or 12 times. Nobody fully believes me. They say I must have fallen asleep, that I dreamed it, that I had a dissociative episode. But I know what I saw, and I know what I shouldn't have done. Walk away from the van. I've spent years looking for answers. I've checked every missing person database that exists. I've talked to police departments, forums, archivists. There are no records of Dion, Riley, or Lenny. Not even in DMV files. It's like they were erased from the system. The only thing I have left of them is that photo I took the morning we left the motel. The 3 of them leaning against the van, laughing under the New Mexico sun. That picture has appeared in several articles and mystery forums, all with different theories. That it was a kidnapping, a collective hallucination, a military experiment, an off-the-map zone. I don't have answers. I only have that photo, scanned and saved on multiple hard drives, just in case it disappears too someday. And I have that image fixed in my mind. The white napkin, the trembling pencil marks, the 4 words that still visit me in dreams. You're almost to the west. I never found out who left it or what it meant. But there's one thing I'm completely sure of. That note wasn't for me. And every time I tell this story, it feels like I'm digging up something that should have stayed buried. Story 7. I always thought people who dropped everything to find themselves were just running away from life. That was before mine collapsed. My marriage, my job, and whatever was left of my identity fell apart almost at the same time. I go by Ethan now, but back then I still signed my full name, Ethan Merrill, 34 years old, resident of Eugene, Oregon. I lived in an apartment filled with silence without laughter, without music, without anyone. When the divorce became official, I packed some clothes, a few notebooks, my camera, and a cooler full of protein bars and gas station instant coffee. I didn't have a plan, just a vague idea. Drive southeast, maybe end up in Texas. For the first few days, the road felt like the only honest thing in my life. Miles of asphalt and time to think, to leave behind what I didn't know how to fix. I drove through tiny towns I'd never even heard of, sleeping in cheap motels that smelled like mildew and stale cigarettes. At night I wrote in my notebook, loose thoughts, phrases I overheard at gas stations, dreams that chased me even when I was awake. At some point, near the California-Nevada border, I took a strange detour to avoid the interstate, and that's where it started. First, it was a sensation, just a brush at the back of my neck. The idea that I wasn't alone. It wasn't anything supernatural, more like intuition, a pattern that didn't fit. Because too many times, when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the same dark blue pickup truck, the same dent in the front bumper, the same crooked side mirror. It could have been a coincidence. That's what I kept telling myself when I saw it again, parked outside a restaurant in a nameless town where I'd stopped for gas. Still, I went in. I ordered a grilled cheese sandwich and soup. I tried to act like nothing was happening. The waitress was chatty, the kind who makes you feel like the world isn't so heavy. She asked where I was going, what I did for work, whether I was traveling alone. I gave vague answers, steering away from it. But when I walked back outside, the truck was gone. No engine noise, no taillights pulling away, just absence. That night I wrote in my notebook, either I'm being followed or I'm losing my mind. I don't know which scares me more. 3 nights after that thought, I took a wrong turn near a service road surrounded by forest. The GPS had started glitching earlier in the day. The screen froze, rebooted itself, and sometimes showed only a blank white background. No roads, no references. I figured I could turn around farther ahead and get back to the highway, but the road kept narrowing, the trees closing in like a funnel around me. It had rained the day before, and the ground had turned into slick mud. I wasn't going fast, but when I hit the brakes, the pedal sank all the way down. No resistance, no squeal, nothing. The car slid sideways, skittered into a ditch, and slammed into a tree hard enough to deploy the airbags. For several seconds, I didn't move. I could only hear my breathing hitting the silence, my heart pounding like a trapped drum in my chest. When I finally caught my breath, I opened the door and climbed out. The air was cold. The forest was too quiet, not peaceful quiet, but that unnatural stillness, like the trees were absorbing sound. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course, I popped the hood to check the damage, and then I froze. The brake line had been cut, not worn down, not rusted through, cut cleanly. I stared at it for minutes, unable to process it. There wasn't even dirt around the cut, as if it had been done very recently. My brain tried to offer explanations. An accident, a branch, damage from the crash. But deep down I knew better. Someone had done it. I grabbed my notebook and a flashlight from the passenger seat, determined to walk back to the main road. That's when I saw something. On the rear windshield, right under the wiper, there was a piece of paper. I thought it was a leaf caught by the wind, but it wasn't. It was a folded napkin. My heart lurched. I took it carefully. It had 4 words written in black marker, in firm capital letters. Don't keep going this way. Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. The napkin was dry. That meant someone had left it after the rain and before I crashed. I turned slowly, flashlight low, scanning the ground. The trees weren't especially dense, but they were tall and perfectly lined up, like they had been planted deliberately decades ago. From where I stood, my car couldn't be seen from the road. Though to be honest, I hadn't seen any real road for a long time. I hadn't passed a single vehicle in over an hour. The forest seemed endless. I started walking, notebook pressed to my chest and the flashlight pointed at the ground, looking for a post, a marker, a sign, anything that would tell me where I was. Everything was the same mud, the same smell of old rain, the same silence that felt like it was listening to me. 20 minutes in, I heard it. Footsteps, behind me, slow, measured, matching my pace. When I stopped, the footsteps stopped too. I didn't look back. I didn't run either. I just kept walking, now with the flashlight off, letting my eyes adjust to the dark. If someone was following me, I'd rather they couldn't see exactly where I was. But the footsteps weren't the worst part. The worst part was the sound of breathing. Soft, controlled, like someone trying not to make noise. I veered off the road and into the trees, stepping carefully on wet leaves. The footsteps disappeared, but the breathing stayed just a few yards away. moving when I moved. I hid behind a fallen trunk. I held my breath. I didn't blink. The breathing stopped too. I stayed like that for more than an hour, not moving. The forest didn't make any other sound, only the occasional distant crack of branches that I couldn't tell was wind or something else. When I finally moved, it was because my legs wouldn't cooperate anymore and the cold was sinking into my bones. I walked back the way I thought I'd come, and then I saw lights. 2 sets of headlights were coming down the road, a tow truck and a county sheriff's patrol vehicle. I thought I was saved. I truly did. I raised my arms and shouted so they'd see me. The headlights blinded me for a second before they stopped in front of me. 2 county deputies got out. One of them looked at me like I was the trespasser, not the victim. The tow truck hooked my car and hauled it slowly out of the ditch. The deputies questioned me for 2 hours on the side of the road. I told them everything. The brake failure, the cut line, the napkin with the message, the footsteps, the breathing in the dark. The taller one nodded while taking notes, his face blank. When I finished, he only said, "We'll look into it, sir. This area has a lot of hunters. It was probably just a prank." A prank. I asked if they'd found footprints or any security cameras nearby, but they ignored me. One of them commented that I should consider myself lucky I walked away from the crash. When I asked for the napkin back, they looked confused. They said there hadn't been any note, but I had left it on the seat, right under my notebook, so the wind wouldn't take it. I knew it was there. They pretended they hadn't seen it. They offered to drive me to the next town. I agreed. From there, I took a bus, hands shaking, stomach knotted. I haven't driven since. I don't even rent cars. The idea of getting back on the road triggers a feeling I don't know whether to call fear or intuition. I completely abandoned the idea of finding myself. Not after that night, because whatever it was that was watching me, I don't think it wanted to kill me. I think it just wanted to scare me, like it was all a long game, a personal warning. I still have the notebook. The last entry says, "Don't trust the road, don't trust the silence." My therapist insists it was trauma-induced paranoia. Maybe she's right, but every so often, I get calls from blocked numbers, always in the middle of the night. They never leave a message, just silence. I stopped answering months ago. It's been almost a year, and there's been no progress, no suspect, no prints, not even confirmation that the brake line was cut. Just my word, which doesn't seem to count for much. In the official report, it was recorded as mechanical failure. Officially, unofficially, I think someone knew I was going to take that road, knew where I'd be and maybe caused it. I've searched maps, records, county archives. There is no Service Road 11B, not on old maps, not on digital ones. It's like that strip of land doesn't exist in any record, like I left the pavement and drove into a place that shouldn't be there, a place where someone or something was already waiting for me.